As of the published date of this episode, I am an associate of Ulta Beauty. The ideas and thoughts represented here are my own and not that of my employer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast. This podcast provides actionable tips and strategies for early-stage beauty brands that are looking to scale from 0 to 20 million. For today's episode, I talk all things retail media networks with Ross Maltby of the Voyageur Group. Let's hear a little bit from our conversation.
I think the biggest thing is the first-party data that you get from the retailers, and so it just allows you to be a lot more prescriptive with your investments, where, traditionally you were spending more on high-level awareness, tracking people across the web, and hoping you're reaching the right consumer, but really not sure totally, and so a little bit more of a buckshot out into the e-commerce world and hoping that that's working or tracking people in different ways and then measuring on the back end. Very hard to understand return on investment with traditional media.
Now that you've heard a little bit from the show, let me tell you a little bit more about Ross. Ross started his career in retail at Target. He spent his time in both merchandising and also at Target's retail media network, Roundel. He currently leads new business development at the Voyageur Group. And the Voyageur Group is an organization that helps brands that are looking to go to retail at both Amazon and Target. I'm so excited to talk retail media networks because this is one of those things that both established and emerging brands are still trying to understand and figure out. We talk about all the tough things, including what the purpose of retail media networks is for both the brands and the retailers, and some of the nuances when working with retailers as you're looking to pull together some of these plans. I'm super excited for you all to hear what we have to talk about today. And after you hear a thank you from our sponsors, we'll get right into the show. Hope you enjoy. I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor for the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast, the Emerson Group. Through their support, we're I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. I know there's so much talk about retail media networks, and you have great experience in that. You came from the buying side at Target. You were at Roundel, where you were working for a retail media network, and now you're working for a media agency that also still partners with Target. So I'm excited to talk all things retail media networks, digital advertising, because it's so critical for early stage brands. And it's very much table stakes for many of the conversations that these brands are having when it comes to getting into retail. So I always like to make sure we level set and start off with some definitions, because founders are at varying stages of their growth journey. So let's just start off with, what are retail media networks and why are they becoming increasingly important for emerging brands or emerging brands growth?
Yeah, so at a very simple level, retail media is the advertising opportunities available through retailers, and really the ability to leverage that first-party purchase data that they have on these consumers. So over the years, cookies have gone away, privacy has become a bigger deal, it's becoming harder to reach consumers, and with that, retailers kind of stepped to the table and said, oh wow, we have all this data on the consumer, let's monetize this and start using that. And so that's kind of been the rise of retail media, and people are calling it the third wave of digital advertising. So search went from 1 billion to 30 billion in 14 years. Social went from 1 billion to 30 billion in 11, I believe, and retail media in 5. And so retail media has taken the world by storm. Lots of things have fallen into place to kind of help buoy that, like I said, with cookies going away. But this is kind of the next revolution and a place where people are continuing to funnel their media dollars moving forward.
Wow, that's really interesting, especially as you talk about the growth in the very short periods of time. Do you think COVID had anything to do with that? Or do you think it's more so just a matter of how things were already moving in the industry?
I think maybe a combination. Maybe COVID accelerated things a little bit with, certainly retailers were getting more consumer data during COVID, a lot more online purchases. And so digital penetration is increasing. And so more consumer purchase data to leverage against, more people visiting your site, more pages to monetize, and all the above. And so probably some acceleration there, but I think the privacy thing was a big piece. As soon as Apple came in and said, we can shut down tracking across apps and, harder to track you across the web, the traditional ways that you reach guests were changing. And so somebody needed to step up to the plate. And I think that's where retailers said, like, hey, we're sitting on this gold mine. Let's lean in here and capitalize. So, maybe an accelerant during COVID, but really just kind of where things were working, I think.
I'm curious how retail media networks differ from traditional digital marketing channels and what unique opportunities, let's say, they offer for brand exposure, because we talked a lot about the cookies going away and that being a real challenge. We know customer acquisition costs are through the roof these days. So how do the retail media networks differ from those traditional advertising methods?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the first party data that you get from the retailers. And so it just allows you to be a lot more prescriptive with your investments where, traditionally you were spending more on high level awareness, tracking people across the web and hoping you're reaching the right consumer, but really, not sure totally. And so a little bit more of a buckshot out into the e-commerce world, and hoping that that's working or, tracking people in different ways and then measuring on the back end. Very hard to understand return on investment with traditional media, where retail media has kind of come in and you can be very prescriptive and say, I want to target people who purchase in this category or are buying these types of items, and that's relevant to my consumer. And even using that first party data offsite as well. And then at the end of the day, now being able to say, hey, I reached that consumer with that message. Did they actually go back to the store and purchase? Did they purchase online and really measure? And so I think it's just getting to the ultimate lowest funnel that you haven't really been able to get to at the traditional media level. So I think the combination of personalization, closing that reporting loop, and allowing you to be a lot more pragmatic with your investments is kind of where retail media is different from that traditional media buy.
And I guess the other key difference with retail media networks versus digital marketing is that you likely need to be, I'm assuming you want to be in stores in order to leverage those retail media networks, right? You can't leverage the retail media networks if you're not stocked essentially at the retailer, right?
Yeah, and there's varying degrees. So, for example, you think about a traditional retailer like Target. Yeah, you probably, before you're leaning in pretty heavily into those investments, you probably want to have an in-store presence. But as digital penetration continues to increase, they start to expand their marketplace. There is a place to invest in digital advertising, but you're just maybe doing it in a smaller way and being a little bit more prescriptive because the sales just aren't there. And so you need to make sure that you have sales that are enough that it makes sense to invest into the retail media buys. But then you look at the other end of the spectrum and go to Amazon. If you want to be successful on Amazon, you have to be advertising. Obviously, they don't have stores. And so, I think that's a completely different model where, you got to be up on page 1, page 2 if you're going to convert within Amazon. And if you don't have that organic rank, the only way to get there is to pay to get up there. And so, yeah, I think it just depends on the channel that you're talking about. And then as these traditional retailers continue to sell more digital originated sales, I think that's opening up the door for brands that aren't in store yet to maybe make a splash at those retailers.
Okay. Thanks for expanding on that. For those brands that are online, that are looking to get online, that are looking to invest in these retail media networks or in different forms of digital marketing, what are some of the key metrics and indicators that can let you know that this was a successful run, that this was an investment that was worthwhile? Are the campaigns effective? And how can brands measure their effectiveness?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a hot topic right now. I think the reality is there's a lot of skepticism, I think, from brands of are these investments working and is this actually driving real sales returns? And because we're still in the infancy, there aren't standards and everybody's grading their own homework. And so the way that Target measures their retail media and performance is different than Walmart and is different than Ulta. And so I think that makes it challenging for brands when you don't have consistency across these platforms. And so, I think in terms of KPIs, I think you see the memes that are out there where you talk to a brand manager and they say, oh, my objectives for this campaign is awareness. And then you probe a little further and it's okay, yeah, it's actually sales. I need to drive sales. And so I think there's just, Again, I think there needs to be more standardization. There's work that's happening towards that, but it's really hard to compare across these networks of what's working, what's not, when they all aren't measuring things the same way. And so, people are looking at return on ad spend and click-through rates and things like that, which, are certainly leading indicators. But then you get into other things to understand, like, well, how much of that was incremental? Like, was that guest going to purchase that anyway? How does that vary where, I remember I was working when I was working in Roundel, working with a brand who would come to me and say, hey, our Walmart performance is 3x what we're seeing at Target. And it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. Like, let's talk a little bit more about that. And you start to dig in and realize, okay, at Target, we had strategies where we were going after lapsed consumers, other brands in the category, and trying to get new guests into the brand. And then you look into their Walmart media and they were targeting current purchasers. And so it's like, well, of course you're going to see a better return. You're targeting somebody who is already buying the brand, who is maybe going to buy whether they saw this media or not. Where at Target, we're trying to get people to convert from another brand or get people back into your brand who haven't bought in 12 months. And so we should have different expectations of what that performance is. We're asking somebody to change their habits to come back into your brand, and we're going to get a lower return on that. But that's an incremental guest, and that's a new guest into your brand. And so like, that's way more valuable, and the lifetime value of that is different. And so it just kind of shows, like, if you don't have consistent strategies across these networks, and that just makes it even harder to measure as well. And so, a long-winded answer to say, like, I think everybody's still figuring out how to make these investments effective and what is effective and what do I measure to understand that. And, the retailers are trying to figure that out as well. And so I think that rapid growth I talked about, where you get to 30 billion in 5 years, it doesn't allow you the 14-year period to build the tech and to understand and the reporting and to have a better understanding of what works or what doesn't. And I think that, people are scrambling a little bit to try to catch up with the rate that the investments have grown to match that, I guess.
Those are some really good examples. And also, I think some practical ways to say, well, what questions might I ask? Because depending on who your account manager might be, they might give you the full range of options. They might give you an abbreviated version. So it's always good to know what's possible. So understanding, you can target new. You can target someone who's already in the category, but maybe is shopping another competitor. You can target someone who is shopping what we would call, like, I think, an affinity category. So if you are a mom that buys vitamins, you probably will buy Band-Aids. So, there's like an affinity where it's like, we want to target the moms that are already buying vitamins because maybe they want to easily add to their cart if we show some licensed Band-Aids that, who knew that, my daughter's in love with Bluey right now. So I'm going to go and buy the Bluey Band-Aids as like a surprise. She'll love me, Mom of the Year award. So some of those things are good questions to ask as brands are sitting down and evaluating if they're going to work with these retail media networks, how they might get the best bang for their buck. And speaking on bang for their buck, I'm curious if you can give a general price range of investment. Obviously, you worked at Roundel, so survey of one, but with the other, places, I know you work with other brands, you work on Amazon or Voyageur does, but what are some of the price ranges for investment into these retail media networks? I know they say it takes money to make money, but wondering how much money?
Yeah. I mean, and I this is an interesting question as well. And I think the great part about what's happening is the barrier to entry is becoming easier and easier. And so, as these retailers build out more tech and more options and more ways to activate, you're getting into less like managed service where you have to work with a team where you fill out a campaign brief and they build your media plan. More and more, these retailers are rolling out self-service activation. So you can access this data, access these placements, and lean in as little or as much as you want. Which is just giving a little bit more control back to the brands, which is great. So, at Roundel, you used to have $75,000 campaign minimums, and that still exists to some extent today. But, with sponsored search and Criteo and target product ads rolling out, or you think about Amazon, like you can lean in on Amazon with $500 a month, and very slowly build from there. And so I think accessing this data and accessing these placements are becoming easier and easier. And that's a big piece for these retailers they're going to make more money if they can make this more easily accessible, and they don't need to have teams who are running these investments and things like that. And so they're motivated as well. And so I think that's great news for brand. On the flip side of that, what makes it hard though is as you have more self-service, you need to know how to activate against these, And so if you don't have somebody at Roundel or these retail media networks helping you activate or building these media plans, you either need to have somebody within your own team who knows this and can, go hands-on keyboard and activate, or, work with somebody like a Voyageur Group who can help you, activate and drive your business. And so, there's pros and cons, but I think just in terms of you're not having these large investments be needed to get started anymore, which is just a big win for emerging brands.
Yeah, I know when you said 75,000 as the minimum, it's like, okay, I'm going to go sit over there because that is outside of my budget.
Yeah.
I know that number is a very big number for a lot of emerging brands and something that is hard to reach. And I've even heard of other brands that might be in like a suite of families. Let's say if they're in a similar category, or if there's, again, this affinity, they might work together with other brands to say, can we each go in 25K? Yeah. But then that requires networking or already having those established relationships so that you can do that, just to share that as another option for emerging brands who might be listening. But I think that is something that's really important as brands think, again, once you get to shelf, what's needed to stay on shelf, what's needed to grow once you get to the shelf. And this retail media network is definitely a big piece or a big part of it. I also know that retail media networks, in some cases for buying teams, can help with things like their own margins. And it's almost one of those things that as a buyer, I would look at when I was at Target and say, oh, well, if you're able to make this investment to Roundel, this ultimately helps your brand's contribution margin, if you will, in the category. Can you talk or touch a little bit on that? I mean, we don't have to get into the numbers, but there are other benefits outside of just driving sales that do bode well for the relationship that you have with the retailer in terms of investing into their retail media networks, right?
Yeah, I mean, we think about this a lot with our brands as well, where like, how can you leverage retail media as the carrot, right? To unlock incremental SKUs on shelf, unlock a sales plan during a key time frame, like help a buyer reach their goals. And like sometimes, kind of back to what we were saying, where there's a lot of skepticism of like, do these investments work or not? Like when you can approach things that way, that helps, where it's like, okay, I'm investing in an incremental $150,000 in retail media. This is a lot of money, and I'm not sure I'm going to get a return on that. But if that can help me secure this end cap during back to school, back to college in my key time frame, like I really almost don't care what happens, on the retail media side, because now the rest of my business is being buoyed by this incremental distribution or this incremental asset that I've unlocked. And so we definitely help brand try to think about things that way, or even just like, how can you think about like, what's your buyer struggling with right now at a category level? And how can you start to build plans that ladder up to that? And so, I think this was a way where, I think I was successful in Roundel because I had the merchandising background. And so instead of getting up and talking about click-through rates and return on ad spends and things like that, it was like, let's connect this back to your merchandising business. Let's figure out what your buyer is talking about. And, an example of this, working with a cleaning brand in my time in Roundel, and was in a meeting with the buyer where he was talking about how they're having trouble with leaking to club. And so, Costco and Sam's, and they have consumers leaking there. And so I go back to my brand and say like, hey, this is something that's happening with the category. This is a hot button for the buyer. Let's put together a club leakage Roundel program and, build this whole campaign around retaining guests who are leaking to club and bringing them back into Target. And now we're able to go present that to the buyer and say, hey, we've been listening to you. We know what you're struggling with, and we want to be the brand to help you combat this issue. And so again, like that then helps unlock distribution, unlock incremental assets, because it's like, we're using Roundel in a way to drive your merchandising business, to think about what is happening with the consumer, and not just to put like pretty return on ad spend and click-through rate numbers on paper. And so I think this is a little bit where we're positioning ourselves at Voyageur Group of like retail media rooted in merchandising. And I think that that's important. As these investments have grown, people are leaning in on their national media agencies who, maybe have never spoken to a buyer or, haven't really, understand like what it takes to get on shelf and stay on shelf and those things where, we started as buyers and merchants and happened to stumble into retail media. And so I think we have those roots of really understanding like, here's what it takes to be successful at a retailer. And here's how you can leverage retail media to do that.
Thank you for expanding on that. I think it's really helpful and important for these brands to consider the big picture. Because when you think sometimes just specifically about how is this helping me right now with this specific ask, if I'm saying, okay, I want to use this to drive sales, there sometimes is a bigger picture of what's the overall relationship. How can I play a role in the category? How can I help and assist my buyer? And that's such a great example of a real problem that buyers might face. Oh, I'm leaking to this other retail channel, or we're finding that we're not appealing to this specific customer segment, right? I want more Gen Alpha. I want more Gen Z. How can your brand, if your brand is targeting Gen Z, is targeting Gen Alpha, how can you leverage that to then go back to your retailer to say, hey, I know that this age demographic is a focus area for you all. So we're going to invest specifically in marketing towards this age demographic to help you and to also help our brand grow. And those are the things that I think retailers look at and say, wow, this is what makes a really good brand vendor partnership.
Yeah, they're listening to me. They understand what my strategy is, what my struggles are, and they're leveraging the tools to think bigger beyond their brand. And I think that bodes well for your buyer relationship for sure.
For sure. And that's super important.
Yes.
So
just a little more important than the retail media side, I think. Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
So would love to talk a little bit about Criteo and sponsored search. First, can you just share what is Criteo? I think we all know what sponsored search is because that's a little more well known, but Criteo is something that may or may not be as well known. So if you could tell us what Criteo is and then talk about how Criteo and sponsored search factor into retail media networks, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, this is just really, one of the couple of companies or platforms that are serving sponsored search placements on these retailer websites. And so, I think that's an ever evolving thing as well, where Target has now rolled out Target product ads. And that is, essentially their way of bringing this in-house and in serving their own, media on their site. And so, really just, the way to access sponsored media or sponsored search on these retailers' websites across multiple networks. And so Criteo helps kind of bring that together across the retailer networks.
Okay. And so those, like a Criteo, let's say, would say, how can we filter in what the consumer is searching for? And how can we leverage that to buy keywords, to buy words from the competition, to allow that to have your product show up as maybe one of the first or one of the third, to your point, like not be on page 2 if you're on Amazon, right?
Yeah, exactly. So getting your product up on those search returns and like less of this isn't the traditional banners that you're seeing with messaging and things like that. This is quite literally moving your product listing up within the listing page on the relevant terms, relevant brand terms, competition terms. And so allows you to, when you don't have the natural organic rank on your main search terms, it allows you to buy spots on those terms when the consumer's searching at the lowest funnel and reach them when they're at that purchase point for those relevant terms.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about one of your success stories with the cleaning brands. I always say it's helpful to have a point of reference to understand what your investment might look like or what your return on investment might look like, what the success story is, even if it is to your point, hey, we were able to build a better rapport with the buyer or with the buying teams. Can you share maybe another example of a success story of how a retailer media network might work with a brand to help drive sales, to drive business, how it helps the brand, how it helps the retailer, just again, to give us a little bit of flavor of what that could look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we focus on is building that foundation for these brands. And so, when you are starting off, it's easy to get sucked into kind of the shiny pennies and say, oh, I want to do CTV and influencer programs and all of these different things. But like, you can light money on fire pretty quickly that way. And so, we try to be really pragmatic with these investments and really help brands think about, again, now that we have this first party data and you can be prescriptive with these investments, how do we make sure that every dollar we're spending is going after the right term, the right audience, and leveraging these tools in a way that, again, we aren't just spraying a bunch of media out there, or we don't have endless budgets like some of these big brands. And so, an example of, we have a brand that was a direct-to-consumer brand. They launched in mass at Target, and then we just launched them on Amazon in January. And for both Target and Amazon, we had pretty similar strategies where we really built that foundation of sponsored search. And so, this is where it's a little bit different, where sponsored search compared to display is more of a cost per click model. And so you're only paying when people are clicking and interacting. And so like, that's super important when you don't have a lot of money. If you're delivering media impression based, like, you're getting into concerns of like viewability. Did people even see this ad? Like, how impactful was it? I don't even know. Did people interact with it? The click-through rates are low, where when you get into sponsored search, you build this, foundation of people actually interacting and coming to your pages and only paying when they do that. And so, with this brand, we went heavy and just sponsored search from the beginning, starting to get up on the relevant pages of brands in the category and drive people to their product detail pages on both Target and Amazon. And then what we were able to do is extend outside of the network through programmatic buys, where we were able to retarget consumers that visited those pages and didn't convert. And so, hey, we know that you clicked on this sponsored search. We know you visited this product detail page. Let's go hit you, a week later while you're out on the web browsing, shopping for other things or reading articles, and remind you about this brand, and then slowly work you back into that funnel to drive back sponsored search as well. And so, it really allowed us to have a successful launch, and successful growth at Target for them. And same thing on Amazon. The first quarter, we exceeded their expectations by 18%, and they just continue to grow and take market share at Target. And a lot of that was because we were pragmatic at the beginning and knowing who we want to go after, who are the key brands that we need to take share from, versus just saying like, we're here, let's tell everybody about it and spend as much money as possible to do that. You don't have that benefit early on. And I think being prescriptive about those investments has allowed us to be successful with that brand on both those platforms.
Yeah, congratulations on a successful launch. I know even if you are someone who's done this many times, it still feels really good when you nail it. Oh, and yeah. You know that, hey, we targeted things the right way, because you don't always get it right for every single one. So it still is really exciting to hear that, like, yes, we got this right. The strategy worked. We thought through it. We planned it out and all of that. I also like how you talked about being really thoughtful about your investments. I know that this is something, you gave this as an example of something that you did with your work through Voyageur. I'm curious if you can share a little bit about, is there a certain level of scale necessary for these investments? So does a brand need to be doing very likely at least 5 million in order to make this type of an investment at an Amazon? We talked a little bit about Roundel, but with some of the items that you talked about sponsored search, can you give us an idea of typically revenue ranges of emerging brands that you're seeing who are making these investments, where, it's either fueling growth or something that they are doing to, again, try to get eyes and increase awareness in that way?
Yeah, I think, similar to what we discussed before, like the great part is this is becoming more and more accessible at smaller budget levels. And so I think it allows you to be, take that pragmatic prescriptive approach. And so, I think it's less really, I think about like what revenue ranges make sense and more just about like what portion of your revenue you're dedicating to it. And so, an easy rule of thumb is maybe 5 to 10% of your spend investing back into your marketing. And so, so, I think that's a little bit easier on Amazon to think that way and to continue to funnel back in. And then, like I said, at the other networks, that's becoming more and more accessible to do at smaller budget levels. And so the reality is, I think this is important at every level. And so, if you start on Amazon and launch in a category, like I said, if you don't have organic search volume for your brand, or you're not, people don't know about your brand, or you're not going viral or things like that, like obviously that's a completely different story. But if you're just launching your brand and slowly trying to build, like you're a skincare brand, you're going to show up on page 65 on page 1 on Amazon. Like nobody's going to find you. And so like you have to spend and you have to get your brand up there. And, but maybe it's just in a smaller way. And maybe there's 2 key terms that you feel like you have an absolute right to win at. And you can look at, there's white space and opportunity within, how you can bid there and just slowly start to take over, gain sales momentum, get some reviews, get some organic rank on those terms. And then maybe you add a 3rd term and a 4th term and slowly build up from there. But if you don't infuse any money, like you're going to stay on page 65. And nobody's going to find you unless they actually type in your brand term. And even sometimes on Amazon, you might not show up for your brand term. And so like, I think it needs to be from the get-go a part of your strategy, whether that's $50 a day or $5,000 a day, depending on where you're at. Like, I think you need to think about having dollars to dedicate to get exposure to your brand.
I agree. And I think in so many of these episodes, when talking about things, whether it is retail media networks or whether we're talking about, launching new product or innovation, the white space and knowing what your right to win comes up. And I think it just goes back to the importance of those brand foundations. I like to just remind folks of that. I know I'm probably repeating myself, but I think it's important to share because it does show that ensuring that you have carved out that white space, what your reason for being is. Yes. It really just reiterates that you have a space in the market where you can win, where you can be successful. Because all of these things that we're talking about, retail media networks, product development, actually getting to the shelf. Some retailers have sliding fees. Some retailers will, you got to pay to play. In order to get there, you want to make sure you have an idea that's going to be successful.
Yeah.
Because you can be out here and be, as you said, burning cash or just spending money and not really have an end sight in goal, an end goal in sight. So I think that's a really important piece.
I think it's a really great point that you make because, sometimes we have brands come to us and, they say, oh, I'm not getting traction with my current agency. My ads aren't performing. What's going on here? And you go look and it's like, oh, well, your items have 2.4 star reviews on Amazon. Like,
you ain't got it.
People don't like your product, right? Like, and so it's like, this retail media and these investments aren't this silver bullet that's like, oh yeah, automatic, you're going to start driving sales. Like, you still have to have something that people like. To your point, you still need to know who your consumer is. What white space are you filling? But if you don't have those things, like retail media is not going to save your business. Even, talking about like Roundel, on average, retail media was impacting about 5% of sales, when you were running campaigns. And so it's like, it's a way to work around the margins and to slowly build and to find new consumers and to go from there. But like, if people don't like your product or you have pricing issues or you're not in stock, like there's so many other things that need to be happening in order for retail media to work. But like, this isn't going to be the savior of your business. I remember, there were times where brands came to me when I was in Roundel and, hey, my buyer's saying if I don't, turn things around in the next 6 months, I'm like off the shelf. Like, what can you do in Roundel to save me? And I would turn down that business because I'm like, you're probably past the point of no return here. Like, even if I double your units per store per week, like if you're getting that warning from the buyer, you're not close.
You're not cutting it.
And so like, that's just, I think people need to be realistic about what these investments will do and what they're used for. And like to your point, you need to have all these foundations figured out first. And the retail media is the supplemental, the slowly gaining new consumers, getting more people to your pages and things like that. But if people don't like your product or you're priced too high or you're not filling a white space, like none of it really matters what you do on the retail media side.
Yeah. And that goes for a number of other areas tied to marketing as well. You have to have a product that people like. You have to know who that consumer is. Again, I share this a lot, but I think it's really important to reiterate just so that as founders are starting off, or if they're rebranding and starting things up again, they make sure that they handle those foundations.
Have to.
I would love for you to just share, we're wrapping up here, Ross. What advice would you give to early stage founders that want to get started with digital advertising? Maybe they just started DTC. Maybe they're getting ready to tackle an Amazon or considering an Amazon. What advice would you give to those brands?
Yeah, I think so, probably pretty similar to what we were just talking about, right? Like, you got to really know your brand. You got to know your consumer. What white space are you filling? Who are you going after? What are the key competitors in the space? Those are the details that allow you to be very pragmatic and prescriptive with these investments. But if you don't know that, like you could find yourself chasing the wrong guests and spending money in the wrong places and just put yourself behind pretty quickly. And then again, I think just ensuring that you're not thinking about this as the savior and driver of your business. This isn't going to do that. And that's not what retail media is here for. And so, I think thinking about it as this end all be all, if I can just master retail media, I'm going to get on shelf. I'm going to drive sales. I'm going to, take over the category. That's not how this works. This is just one element similar to a promo strategy or something like that is just an incremental way to drive your business, to think about how you get new consumers, maintain your current consumers. But yeah, I think just being realistic about those investments and I think you said at the beginning of the program, asking questions to these retail media networks as well. What are you seeing that works with other brands? What's been successful? How big are these audiences I want to go after? Where should I be investing? What data are you seeing on your end? And so, yeah, I think just being realistic and having a strong understanding of your brand will just set you up for success from there. And yeah, I think that's the best advice I can give on just ensuring that you're not thinking about this as the savior or the key driver of your business moving forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross. It's like this is one piece of the puzzle.
That's it, right? Just, similar to all the other levers that you pull to drive your business, this is just another one of them. And I think if you think about it that way, your expectations will be managed in a better way. So
love that. Love that. Well, look, if people want to learn more about you or Voyageur, where can they find you? Where can they go?
Yeah. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me at ross@voyageurgroup.co or our website, voyageurgroup.co as well, or reach out to Monique and she'll point you my way and we'll make sure we get in contact. But always happy to talk to new brands, share our opinion on, what they should be doing. And, really appreciate you having me on here today to talk about this topic.